Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new to my channel, hello, my name is Gabby and welcome to my strange little YouTube channel. Now today's video we are back with another identified DOE case, and this one is one that I became quite obsessed with lately, and I knew that I had to do a video on it, and I wanted to spend extra time on it making sure that the video was perfect and I got all the details correct. It does hit home a little bit for me because this case takes place a couple hours from where my mom's side of the family is, and you guys definitely agree down in the comments that cases that take place close to where, you know, places that you're familiar with or that you live or where your family's from, it definitely just kind of hits you a little bit differently, and you automatically have some sort of connection to it. I also have to give a huge shout out to Todd Matthews. He is the person who identified this DOE, and I reached out to him and he got back to me really quickly and was super helpful with my video, and I just have so much respect for people that spend so much time and so much effort trying to identify these people and give them back their names. So with that being said, let's just get into it. On the morning of May 17th, 1968, a man named Wilbur Riddle discovered something that he would never forget and would stem into becoming a local mystery for almost 30 years. Wilbur had gone to Eagle Creek, which runs alongside Interstate Highway 75 near Georgetown, Kentucky, to look for glass insulators left behind by workmen repairing phone lines. He would paint them and resell them. At around 11 a.m. at the interchange of I-75 and US 25, he found a bag, a pretty big bag, that was over a fence right off of the highway in some bushes. Now this bag was of decent size. It was a kind of green tarp. There was something rolled inside of it and it was wrapped all around in thin cord. He tried to pull the bag loose from some underbrush and it kind of rolled a little bit. So he went closer to it and tried to open it, and upon opening it, he smelled a horrible odor and he knew immediately what was going on, so he ran back to his truck, he sped off to a local payphone and called Bobby Vance of the Scott County Sheriff's Department. Minutes later, Wilbur brought not only Vance, but Deputy Jimmy Williams and Deputy Coroner Kenneth Grant to his findings. They discovered that a badly decomposed body was wrapped up in the tarp. The woman was completely naked other than a towel around her shoulder. She was doubled up and clenching her fist, and she had obviously been deceased for a few weeks now. She had no bullet wounds or stab wounds, so other than it obviously being a homicide, they at first had no idea how she died, but they took the body of the young woman to St. Joseph's Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky to run more tests. The woman was Caucasian, about 5 feet 1 inches, weighed about 110 to 115 pounds, with an estimated age of between 16 to 19 years old, with short reddish brown hair, and she had been dead for about 2 to 3 weeks. This woman was very pretty. She was a girl next door type looking girl, but she had no physical characteristics to set her apart. No scars, birthmarks, piercings, tattoos, or extremely prominent facial features, so they knew that finding out who she was going to be very difficult, even though they were able to get one fingerprint from one of her decaying fingers. But of course, they had nothing to compare it to. She was dubbed the name Tent Girl by a reporter for Kentucky Post and Time-Star because of course she was found wrapped up in some sort of a tent material. They ran a more in-detail autopsy of the body, and she didn't have any toxic materials or poison found in her body, but she did have a slight discoloration to her skull, so they figured that she had been knocked unconscious and then rolled up in the tarp and ultimately died because of suffocation. 2 weeks later, a man named Harold Musser, a sketch artist for the Covington Police Department, produced a sketch of the young woman after weeks of studying her autopsy photos. The sketch was published statewide and tons of leads came in. Police received hundreds upon hundreds of leads. A lot of people thought that they knew the young girl, but she looked like a lot of other women because there were no distinct characteristics setting her apart, so all these leads went nowhere. One lead came from a truck driver who claimed to have given a ride to a hitchhiking couple on April 14th, only about a month before the woman's body was found. He said the woman was wearing a short dress and a gray sweater, claiming she looked just like the sketch of the woman, and described the man as having a hippie-like appearance. It was raining that night, and he said that the couple was definitely not dressed for the weather, and he said that they had camping gear with them, which makes sense because the woman was found wrapped in a tarp, and he said that they were arguing the entire time. They were screaming at each other, and he got fed up with them and kicked them out of the truck, and the last thing he knew was they were heading north to Georgetown, which the area is correct, but From further research, they realized that the woman that he saw that night was not, in fact, Tent Girl. Someone later called in saying that they think the towel wrapped around her shoulder was possibly cut from a towel used in a bathroom of Noble's restaurant. And they went to the restaurant and found no similar material anywhere and asked people at the restaurant if they possibly had seen the young girl, and everyone said no. Police were also told that in this area there was a lone woman's shoe, but when they went, they were unable to track this shoe down. They ran more tests on the towel that was wrapped around her shoulder, and they found out that it wasn't a towel at all. It was actually a diaper. Back in the day, they used more of a cloth-like material for diapers. It's a completely different material than the diapers that are used in today's time. The story of Tent Girl was published in Master Detective magazine, hoping to spread the word more about this case, and they got a ton of leads from this, but all these leads went nowhere. They all hit a dead end. This Jane Doe was laid to rest in Georgetown Cemetery under the name Tent Girl for the next 29 years. The discovery of who this woman was actually all started with a spooky story. Let's fast forward to Halloween of 1987 when a group of teenagers were sitting around on Halloween night telling scary stories. One of the girls was named Lori Riddle, the daughter of Wilbur Riddle, the man who found this unknown woman back in 1968. She told the true story of how her father came across the woman, and she's been unidentified for all these years. One of the boys in the group was 17-year-old Todd Matthews, and he became completely intrigued by this story. Him and Lori within the next year became married, and he became more and more obsessed with the tale of Tent Girl. It saddened Todd that this woman was dead and buried, and her family probably had no idea. Todd's brother and sister passed away as infants, so he related to wanting to be able to see a family member and not being able to. Todd said, "She was no different from my siblings. Somebody is just like me out there and they want to be able to visit their sibling. I guess I sort of adopted her. Then you are my sibling until I can find your siblings." Todd visited her grave, he asked his wife's father tons of questions, and then with the internet becoming more popular in the 90s, he used this as a tool for researching, and he would spend countless hours every single night trying to gather as much information about Tent Girl as possible. In November of 1997, he created a website named tentgirl.com in the hopes that her family would possibly come across it and contact him. In 1998, he was looking through an online classified site, kind of like the equivalent of today's Craigslist, and he found a post from January of 1998 from an Arkansas woman named Rosemary Westbrook searching for her sister who had been missing for years. The details, the timing, the geography, everything was spot on, and Todd was pretty convinced that this woman's sister was their Jane Doe. Todd was terrified to call, and he said, "And I did what we shouldn't do. I made a cold call to the family. I thought I'm going to end all their dreams." Hearing the voice of the family, you realize you're probably hearing a voice very similar to the person they were looking for. All these things, they just ran through your mind. Does she look like her? What's she going to think if this is her? Is she going to cry, or is she going to be relieved? The woman remained calm on the phone though, and she sent over pictures so they could compare to the autopsy photos. They compared them. They were absolutely identical. They ran a DNA test, and there was a match. This Jane Doe's family had been searching for years, trying to find out what happened to her, and the people working on this case had been searching for years, trying to find out who this woman was, and finally, both sides had come together. After almost 30 years, this unidentified woman who went by the name of Tent Girl finally got her name back. Her name was Barbara Ann Hackmann Taylor, or Bobby as many called her. Her remains were put back in Georgetown Cemetery, but her headstone now bears her actual name with the inscription, "Loving Mother, Grandmother, and Sister."
Back in 1968, Todd Matthews' father-in-law discovered the woman's body wrapped in a tent and dumped off US 25.
The guardrail wasn't here. The roads changed its shape slightly.
No one knew her name, and for decades she was called Tent Girl. And when Todd heard the story, the factory worker turned into an amateur detective. Todd eventually identified Tent Girl as Barbara Hackmann Taylor, 11 years after he first heard about her and 30 years after her murder.
The family decided to keep her buried in this spot because she had become sort of a local legend. I mean, everybody knew her and her story, and the town really took care of her, making sure that the plot and the grave was always kept in perfect condition. Now let's get into a little backstory about Barbara. At the time of her death, she was 24 years old, and she was born on September 12th, 1943. She was married to a man named George Earl Taylor. She had 3 children and lived in Lexington, Kentucky. Now, when Barbara was young, her father and brother were swept away in a flood. Barbara growing up, I'm sure many of you can relate to this who live in a small town. I know a ton of people who live in a small town and they all agree. You kind of grow up wanting more. You want to see the rest of the world. You feel like something else is out there, and that's definitely how Barbara felt growing up. And then she met Earl, who worked at a carnival, and she was just captivated by this. She thought, this is my chance to get out of this small town. He had a daughter named Bonnie, and Bonnie and Barbara soon became inseparable. Her and Earl within a few months married, and she joined Earl and his daughter at the traveling carnival. And it was really hard on her family because Barbara didn't have a phone, and she had to call her family whenever she could from a payphone. In 1964, they moved to Miami, Florida, and she went on to have a son named Sonny and a daughter named Michelle, and she was a stay-at-home mom with her 3 children, and Earl continued to travel with the carnival. Barbara's sister Nancy and some other family members actually moved to Miami, Florida to be closer to Barbara and the children. One day while Nancy is at work, Barbara and Earl show up, and Barbara's asking Nancy if she wants to buy their television. Nancy was super confused by this. She's like, I already have a TV, why do you need the money so bad? And Barbara says that the FBI is looking for Earl because he was supposed to re-enlist in the military and he didn't want to, so they had to leave town as fast as possible. That was the last time that Nancy would ever see her sister alive. A little bit of time goes by and Nancy gets a visit from a man named Dave. Dave was friends with Earl, and Nancy says, you know, have you heard from Earl and Barbara? And this man, Dave, says that Earl told him that Barbara had left him and ran away with another man. Nancy knew that this was not possible. This had to have been completely fabricated because there was no way that Barbara would leave her children. So she asked Dave where Earl was, and she tracked down Earl about 20 miles north in farmland. She pays Earl a visit, and Earl sticks by his claim, saying that Barbara left him for another man, and Nancy knew that there was no way that Earl was going to tell her the entire truth, so she just left. She ends up going home and telling her mother what happened, and her mother decides to pay Earl a visit herself, and when she gets there, Earl and the children are gone. They tried to file a police report, but because she was an adult and there was no evidence of foul play, they really couldn't do much. In the late 80s, Bonnie and Michelle contacted Nancy, telling her that they never stopped wondering where their mother was. They said that after leaving Florida, they went to Lexington, Kentucky. Bonnie states that the night before Barbara disappeared, that she was laying in a bed next to her parents' bed, and she was awoken in the middle of the night to what sounded like a struggle. She kind of looked over a little bit, and in the dark, it looked like Barbara was trying to get away from Earl, and Earl was keeping her held down. When Bonnie woke up for school the next day, Barbara was nowhere to be found, and this was very strange to Bonnie at the time because Barbara was always the one who woke her up for school and got her ready. When Bonnie got home from school that day, Barbara was still not there, and Earl had the entire car packed up. And she asked where Barbara was, and Earl said, oh, she'll catch up with us later. Earl took the children to Ohio and dropped them off with some family he didn't even really know too well, and he completely left and visited them a few times throughout the years until he passed away from cancer in October of 1987. Now, with most cases that I share on my channel, I'm always pretty hesitant to just say, oh, like I definitely think this person's guilty, because I never know who's gonna come across my video and who it's going to offend. But with this case, it's pretty obvious to most people that Earl was responsible for Barbara's death. Barbara's son Sonny passed away in 1984, but both Bonnie and Michelle and anyone else in Barbara's family and anyone else who researches into this case all pretty much agree that Earl was most likely responsible. But unfortunately, any secrets that he kept in him most likely died when he did. Todd Matthews went on to be a co-founder of the DOE Network, which is a volunteer group dedicated to bringing closure to cases concerning missing or unidentified people, and he works on solving other cases as well. An episode of the show Who Killed Jane Doe aired on January 23rd, 2018, revolving around the case of Barbara Ann Hackmann. This case is bittersweet like many cases, but at least she finally got her name back. This is a case that I am so happy to have finally shared on my channel because it has been just an obsession of mine lately. I've been just so into this case. I've researched everything I possibly could about this case for this video, and with the help of Todd Matthews. Again, thank you if you are watching this video. Thank you for helping me out, and thank you for your hard work. I also highly recommend watching the Who Killed Jane Doe episode about this case. I will link it down below for you guys to check out. It goes into more detail, and there's first-hand accounts and interviews with the people who worked on the case and the people related to Barbara. And I also recommend just watching the show in general because it's really interesting. Definitely let me know down below in the comments what you think about this case, and if there are any other identified Doe cases or cases in general that you want me to talk about. If you did like that video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already. It really helps me out and helps getting the word out about these cases even more. I love you guys so much, and we'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.